Now, campaigners who won at the Supreme Court over the legal definition of a woman say they've now been inundated with death threats and abuse since the judgment. On Wednesday, the UK's highest court ruled that the terms woman and sex under the 2010 Equality Act refer to biological women and biological sex. Well, let's speak now to Susan Smith, Director of For Women Scotland, who brought that action at the Supreme Court. Susan Smith, thank you so much for being with us. Just tell us what has happened to you and to your colleagues in the past few days since that ruling.
Well, I have to say that most of the correspondence we're receiving is overwhelmingly positive, and it's lovely to hear that, because there are so many people who have had difficulties at work or in facilities or spaces, and they've written to thank us, which has been wonderful. But unfortunately, there are always going to be a number of people who are very angry, and the way they express that anger is in dehumanizing, sexist, abusive, threatening language. It does feel very much like the last gasp of a sort of very vicious men's rights activists, but and that's how it's expressed. And that's not been pleasant. And I think we saw some of that as well on display in the protests yesterday.
Yeah, we're showing some pictures of that at the moment. Interesting that you use that term last gasp, Susan. Do you think that it is sort of coming towards the end of certainly the vitriol and the anger in this debate, which of course you have been at the centre of and had to face for many, many years now?
I hope so, because we've now got clarity on the law, so everybody knows where they stand. And I think then if other groups need to have spaces or services, they can look at how best to sort that out, as women did in the past. And you know, it needs to be turned into something productive, because it's felt very, very negative. We feel like we've been on the end of a constant assault on our rights for a very long time now. You know, it was never about compromise. It was always about undermining our legal rights. And now I hope that now that has been put to bed, that perhaps some people can think about different ways that they can work constructively.
Well, I was on Wednesday, and I spoke to Maya Forstater, and I also spoke to Ellie Gomersall as well, a trans rights campaigner, who talked about the concerns that people within that community do feel at this point. And we heard some of it in the reporting from Amelia as well, that some people who were on that march yesterday feel entirely overlooked, entirely erased, and perhaps under threat as well.
Well, you know, for years and years, we've been hearing from women who have not been able to go out shopping because there are mixed sex changing rooms now. We've heard from women who have been frightened to access rape crisis centres. You know, a mother of a girl who was gang raped, 14 years old, felt she couldn't access a rape crisis centre because there was a male person in charge of it. We've had little girls assaulted in supermarket toilets. I mean, this nonsense now that suddenly people are worried about them being overlooked. These women were overlooked for years, and not only overlooked, bullied and subject to vitriol. So I do find it quite enraging that we're all supposed to have sympathy when none was extended towards those women. But I also think, you know, if this is an issue of male violence, if there are some men who feel they're vulnerable in male spaces, that is bad, and we all need to work to put an end to that. But the solution is not to make women less safe. Women are not human shields.
And the judge presiding over this made it really clear that trans people have protections under the Equalities Act as well. They always did, and,
yes.
They will continue to do so. Look, that's the court.
Absolutely, and that's as it should be.
100%. And that's the court's ruling. I wonder, in the days now that have passed since that judgment, and with what's happened as well online and in the real world in some places, does there need to be some firmer political direction on this? Do you want to hear from the Prime Minister about where the country goes from here? Because what we're having now, we've already seen it in some organisations, is that organisations are going to have to sort of rework some of the policy that they put in place before this law was clarified.
Yes, there does need to be better direction, because we have had 2 judicial reviews. Our first one already established that self-identification of sex was not lawful. And yet governments and organisations, including the NHS, carried on as if it were. Their policies were all based on self-identification. This has just cleared up that last remaining bit of law. But in fact, they were already way out of date. They were overstepping the mark as it was. So they do need to be rewritten. And I think clear guidance from the government would be good. I also think that politicians...
Susan, I'm sorry to speak over you. We're going to have to step away with the King's popping up from Windsor. But thank you very much for being with us, Susan Smith, there, Director for Women Scotland.